Ladies and gentlemen, let us pause for a moment and acknowledge something we rarely say out loud. I feel lonely. It is a statement we whisper to ourselves in the quiet moments, in the spaces between conversations, in the stillness of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, let us pause for a moment and acknowledge something we rarely say out loud. I feel lonely. It is a statement we whisper to ourselves in the quiet moments, in the spaces between conversations, in the stillness of the night. We are conditioned to fear loneliness. From a young age, we are taught that being alone is something to avoid, a sign of failure, social rejection, or personal inadequacy. We see images of people surrounded by friends, engaged in constant interaction, and we internalize the idea that to be alone is to be unwanted, disconnected, incomplete. And so, we run from it. We fill our time with distractions as social media, television, work, endless plans, or anything to avoid the unsettling quiet of solitude. But what if solitude was not something to be feared? What if, instead of being a void, it was a spacious, vast, open landscape where the most profound clarity could emerge? When we stop running from loneliness and instead sit with it, something remarkable happens. The initial discomfort, the aching sense of isolation, begins to fade. We start to notice what exists beyond the noise of our thoughts. Without the constant pull of external validation, we turn inward, and in that stillness, we discover something unexpected. We are not empty. We are vast, we are spacious. Solitude, rather than being a prison, becomes a gateway, a place where we can see ourselves clearly, without the distortions of social expectations or the pressures of being constantly engaged. It is in this spaciousness that our deepest insights arise. When we are alone, when we allow ourselves to truly be alone without resistance, we begin to understand who we are beneath the roles we play. Who are you when there is no one to impress, no one to please, no one to perform for? Who are you when the only voice you hear is your own? These are questions we rarely ask ourselves because we are too busy escaping into the company of others, too distracted to sit with the discomfort of self-exploration. But when we do, we find that solitude is not emptiness, it is a canvas, a vast open space where new thoughts, realizations, and even profound transformations can occur. Throughout history, some of the greatest minds have discovered their most significant insights in solitude. Think of philosophers, artists, monks, and sages who intentionally withdrew from society, not because they rejected connection but because they understood that true understanding arises in stillness. They were not escaping the world but immersing themselves more deeply into it by first understanding themselves. When there is no one else to reflect our identity back to us, we are forced to look at ourselves directly, and that is where true clarity begins. Solitude allows us to separate what is truly ours from what has been imposed upon us. So much of what we think, feel, and believe comes from external influence. So what society tells us is valuable, what our families expect of us, what our peers validate. But in solitude, all of that fades. We are left with only ourselves, and in that space, we can begin to ask, what do I truly want? What do I truly believe? What do I feel, when no one is watching? These questions do not come easily, and the answers are not always immediate. But they emerge, slowly, like stars appearing in the night sky once the artificial lights of the city fade away. Of course, embracing solitude does not mean rejecting connection. Human relationships are beautiful and necessary. But there is a difference between seeking companionship out of genuine desire and seeking it out of fear of facing ourselves, fear of what might arise in the silence. When we embrace solitude, when we see it not as a burden but as a gift, we no longer cling to others to fill an imagined void. Instead, we connect with people from a place of wholeness, rather than from a place of lack. Loneliness arises when we believe that being alone is a deficiency. But solitude is not loneliness, it is an opportunity. It is an invitation to step beyond the noise of the world, beyond the roles we play, and into a space where we can truly listen to ourselves, to life, to the quiet wisdom that exists beneath the surface of our busy minds. When we stop fearing solitude, we begin to see it for what it truly is, a gateway to understanding, a path to clarity, and perhaps, the most profound connection of all, the connection with our own being. The more we chase people to fill our loneliness, the more disconnected we feel. It is a paradox we rarely notice, yet it shapes so much of our emotional experience. We long for connection, so we reach outward, seeking companionship, validation, and a sense of belonging. But in this pursuit, something strange happens. The very connection we seek seems to slip further away. Relationships feel shallow, conversations feel unfulfilling, and despite being surrounded by people, we still feel alone. It is as if the harder we grasp, the more elusive true connection becomes. This happens because when we chase others to escape loneliness, we are not truly seeking connection, or we are seeking relief. We are hoping that someone else can fill a space within us that feels empty. But no one can do that, not permanently. When we look to others to complete us, we place a weight on relationships that they were never meant to carry. We become dependent on external affirmation, always needing reassurance that we are valued, that we belong. And yet, deep down, a quiet anxiety lingers. What if they leave? What if I am not enough? What if this feeling of connection is temporary? This is why so many people, even in crowded rooms, even in seemingly close relationships, still feel profoundly alone. It is not the presence of people that creates connection. It is something deeper, something less tangible, something that cannot be forced. True connection does not come from clinging to others, but from realizing that we were never truly separate to begin with. The need to chase disappears when we recognize that we are already part of everything. Imagine a tree with deep roots. It does not run after the rain, desperately seeking nourishment. It simply stands, open to receiving, knowing that it is already connected to the earth, to the air, to the cycle of life. In the same way, when we become deeply present with ourselves, we stop looking for others to complete us. We understand that we are already whole. And when we reach out from this place here, not from need, but from genuine openness, something shifts. Relationships take on a new quality. They are no longer about filling a void, but about sharing in the richness of life. The irony is that the less we need others in order to feel whole, the more deeply we can connect with them. When we are at peace with ourselves, we show up differently in our relationships. We listen more, without the constant need to be heard. We appreciate people for who they are, rather than for how they make us feel. We love freely, without grasping, because our love is no longer tied to fear. This is the paradox of connection. When we stop chasing it, it comes naturally. Consider the most meaningful conversations you have ever had, the moments when you felt deeply understood, when a connection felt effortless. Those moments likely did not arise from desperate attempts to fill a void. They happened in the spaces between words, in shared silences, in the simple act of being present with another person. True connection is not something we manufacture, it is something we allow. This realization is liberating. It means that loneliness is not a problem that needs to be solved by accumulating more relationships. It is a signpost pointing us inward, urging us to reconnect with ourselves first. Because when we are at peace within, we naturally attract the kind of relationships that reflect that peace. So, instead of chasing people, instead of grasping for connection, we can choose to be still. We can choose to sit with ourselves, to become comfortable in our own presence, to cultivate a deep sense of inner connection. And from that place, we will find that we are never truly alone. We were always part of something greater. And when we recognize this, we will see that the connection we have been searching for was always right here, waiting for us to notice. Loneliness is not the absence of people, but the illusion that we are separate from life itself. We often believe we are isolated islands, adrift in a vast and indifferent sea, forgetting that we are, in fact, waves in the same ocean. This illusion of separation is at the root of much of our suffering, making us feel as though we must constantly seek external validation, companionship, and distractions to fill an imagined void. But what if there was no void? What if the sense of isolation we experience is not a reflection of reality, but a misunderstanding of our true nature? From the moment we are born, we are given an identity, a name, a sense of being an individual distinct from everything around us. Society reinforces this perception, teaching us that we must define ourselves by our achievements, our relationships, our possessions. We grow up believing that we are contained within our own skin, that we end where the world begins. This conditioning creates a deep-rooted fear that if we are not constantly surrounded by people or engaged in meaningful interactions, we are alone. But consider for a moment the ocean. A wave rises from the surface, moves forward, and eventually disappears back into the hole. While it exists, it may believe it is separate, an individual force traveling across the sea. But in truth, it has never been apart from the ocean. It is the ocean, expressing itself in a temporary form. Just like that wave, we too are expressions of something greater, whether you call it nature, the universe, or simply life itself. We are not separate from existence, we are existence. The feeling of loneliness often arises when we resist this truth. When we see ourselves as cut off from the world, as if we are observers rather than participants, we feel an ache, a longing for connection. But the irony is that connection is never truly absent, it is only our awareness of it that fades. Even in solitude, we are surrounded by life. The air we breathe was once part of the breath of countless beings before us. The water we drink has traveled through rivers, clouds, and oceans, touching the lives of every creature on Earth. The atoms in our bodies were forged in the hearts of stars billions of years ago. Nothing about us is separate. Yet, when we sit alone in our room, scrolling through a screen, watching people interact while we remain on the outside, it is easy to forget all of this. Loneliness feels like a wall between us and the rest of the world. But that wall is not real, it is a thought, a perspective, a conditioned belief. When we shift that perspective, the entire experience of solitude changes. Instead of seeing solitude as a void, we can begin to experience it as spaciousness. Instead of perceiving silence as emptiness, we can hear it as the quiet hum of life itself. Instead of feeling isolated, we can recognize that we are part of a vast and intricate dance that is unfolding every moment. The trees outside are not indifferent to our presence here, they are simply existing, just as we are. The sky does not ignore us, it simply is. And in this simple being, there is connection. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, and spiritual teachers have discovered profound truths in solitude. When distractions fade away, when we stop seeking connection externally and instead turn inward, we find that we were never truly alone to begin with. The stillness reveals that everything we have ever needed has always been within us. We do not need to be surrounded by people to feel connected. Connection is not something to be acquired, it is something to be recognized. So, the next time you feel lonely, consider the possibility that what you are feeling is not the absence of connection, but a temporary forgetting of it. Instead of running from solitude, sit with it. Observe it. Ask yourself whether you are truly alone, or whether you are simply caught in the illusion of separation. When that illusion dissolves, you may find that what remains is not loneliness, but a deep and abiding sense of belonging to the world, to life, to everything. Because loneliness is not a curse. It is an invitation to remember that you were never truly alone. You were always part of something greater. And when you understand that, you will see that the whole universe has been embracing you all along.